I can't believe it's been 30 years since the LA riots. I was living in San Francisco. I remember now, what people need to remember is that there was video of a police riot. Rodney King was
Mhm.
just being pulverized by about 10 LA cops. It was incontrovertible evidence that Rodney King was beaten to within an inch of his life. It was
Mhm.
This was before iPhones, so it
Mhm.
was our first glimpse into what African Americans experienced when they were pulled over by cops. If this is what gets captured on a clunky video camera in 1992, imagine what happens most of the time. So we watch that video
Mhm.
and you go, okay, these cops, they're going to be put away for life. I wasn't even concerned about it. They held the trial in Simi Valley, where the Ronald Reagan Library ended up being, so the officers could get a fair shake, so they said. And I'm in my office in San Francisco, and
Mhm.
comedian Larry Brown calls me, and he says they've acquitted the police officers. And I started laughing. I thought it was a joke. I swear to you, I thought it was a joke.
Well, let's go back a little bit, and if we want to start it in '91 at the Rodney King beating, um, if you think about why that trial was moved, and you go back into the Wayback Machine and think about famous trials that have happened in Los Angeles County, we can start in '69 with
Manson?
Charles Manson, and then again Richard Ramirez in '86 or so.
The
His
Night
trial is also the Night Stalker is also held in Los Angeles County. Now, whenever you have a trial like that where you think the jury pool is going to be contaminated because it's such big news, you try to move the trial over. So Los Angeles County has had big trials in the county and no one had a problem. But for whatever reason, they wanted to move these officers. Um, Originally, the prosecution wanted the trial to be moved to Alameda County because the racial makeup was similar to LA. And there was a courthouse sitting there, and everyone would have had to have lived in Alameda County. Ventura County had a brand new courthouse in a place called Simi Valley. Um, and mildly unbeknownst to the prosecution, it was a bit of a retirement community for law enforcement and military. So it had a very, it's part of the red part of California, David, that a lot of people don't think about when they think of California. They think of LA and maybe the Bay Area and don't understand that the rest of Cal, as you know, as someone that's probably spent enough time in SoCal, Orange County is very red. Um, Simi Valley is one of those red places. So the jury pool is very different. And when I did a show Saturday talking about the 30 years. And as I was writing up the thing that I actually sent you or sent to Hannah, I hope she sent you.
I
Um,
watched it.
One thing that came to mind is there's two things that are very important when we think about Rodney King and the riots is that Rodney King's trial and O.J. Simpson's trial are two kind of sides of the same justice coin. So the 24-hour news cycle goes crazy during the Rodney King riots, which we don't really call the Rodney King riots. And mainly because Rodney King spoke. And if you remember, as a man in comedy, he was the butt of every joke after he spoke. And the
Can't
only
we all
reason,
get along?
yeah, everybody thought that was funny. And I actually get a little emotional whenever when I was cutting that clip because there's pain and there's honesty in those words. And people have to understand that was the first day of his civil trial. And he was dragged through the mud so hard in the criminal trial. He never did test positive for PCP, which was the officer's defense for beating him. And
for having
just so people,
superhuman strength. It's
for having
superhuman.
superhuman strength. So just for the record, so we can kind of kill this once and for all the studies that have ever been done on PCP, there's no extra strength you get. You may lose certain pain receptors, but when it comes to actual being stronger, doesn't exist. Rodney King wasn't under the influence of PCP.
And this was right around the time Hillary was talking about super predators.
The super predators,
a couple of years later,
it's a few years later. So if you want to talk about super predators, which I was actually looking at.
I'm sorry, I shouldn't have brought that up. Go on.
No. I think it's very important. I think it's a very important thing to talk about.
I think Hillary was married to a super predator.
The super predator narrative is important because when you think about New York and you think about that time, New York was a very violent city, and much like LA, you have a violent police force that goes with it. It's a bit corrupt. Historically, New York and LA have corrupt and violent police forces, but also you have a lot of crime in both of those areas. So it's not like, how can I say it? There's roving hordes of cops that are oppressive, but there's also roving hordes of criminals at the same time, because we've cut out jobs, because we're in deindustrialized cities where a lot of the manufacturing sector has moved. So what generally takes the place is going to be the illegal marketplace of work. So New York is getting flooded with cheap cocaine from Florida. And around the time of Rodney King and the blowup of LA gangs, you're seeing them get flooded with cheap cocaine from Mexico. And the gangs give these large drug cartels a distribution network that's massive in scope when you think about it. So I try to use this time to really talk about how capitalism functions, because too often we look at this strictly through a racialized lens. So Rodney King is only about the evil of white people. And that's why I say him and OJ are kind of the yin yang twins, if you will, of the way we look at justice. Because if we strictly look at justice through a racialized lens, then why wasn't OJ thrown under the bus? And why was he handled with kid gloves the way he was? And he was famous, doesn't mean anything. He's still colored. Rodney King doesn't get the same protection as OJ Simpson when we think about justice, and we look at it as it's just racialized. When you think about the 65 watts riots, where everyone likes to start, how does 92 happen? They go, well, 65, a lot of things changed post 65. There were a lot of race-based programs that changed the makeup, but again, jobs were leaving the area. LA becomes extremely deindustrialized. Most young people that thought they had a future in the factories, as the factories left, there was nothing there for them. The gangs were there to take that place. And again, as cheap drugs flow in, now you've created a new job marketplace, because so much money is being made.
Dealers and cops.
Think about it. 1 kilo of cocaine in this time period that's coming to you somewhat pure, you can step on that so many times, and you can now cook it into crack, maybe make $50,000, $60,000 on a night.
Right.
And you now have
we don't want to talk about, let's not bring up Hunter Biden. This is not the time or the place to bring up Hunter Biden, please.
But you kind of have to talk about these illegal networks that kind of blow up in this time frame. And one thing we don't talk about is the fact that police were non-existent in these areas. That is why these cartels were like, look, we found a great place to drop off this dope. There's an open air drug market in Los Angeles with an amazing interstate highway system that's enabling these cats to distribute dope all over the city. That's never part of the conversation. It's always from the lens of, well, how can cops be nicer? We have to remember that cops were kind of just non-existent in the first place. Um, before Rodney King gets beat with batons, there was a massive problem with hundreds of Black people and people of color in general dying in police transport, that were getting choked out from a carotid chokehold, which became illegal in, I think, 83. After too many people were dying from the chokehold, they then gave police these lead batons and taught them how to strategically hit joints to break bones. And this is how you're going to, calm down these rogue individuals that are high on PCP. And as the gang problem was kind of ripping through neighborhoods, police really didn't do anything. So the call from even Black leaders in the early to mid 80s was, we can deal with a little bit of police repression, but what we can't deal with is the drug problem. So we'd rather have overzealous law enforcement than drug dealers kind of running the area. So overzealous law enforcement was, well, we're just going to thump. And this really gets doubled down on when a young Japanese woman is accidentally gunned down in Westwood. You get what you would call stop and frisk nowadays. You get that in LA times 10. And also you have a history going back to the 40s of a police chief that actually had proteges that took over his mantle that were very fascistic. But by the time we get down to Chief Daryl Gates, the fascistic police force no longer is just a bunch of white dudes from the South that came from the military. Now it's people of color, it's women. Rodney King was beat by a multi-ethnic, multi-gendered cadre of cops. Oh yeah, there was a woman in there too. According to Rodney King, she's a, yep.
But I don't remember I don't remember an African American.
Nope, there was a Latin man, Brasino.
Okay.
So we also have to remember that as jobs are leaving the area, where else can you get a job making, at the time, $50,000, $60,000 a year is a lot of money, and your union? Law enforcement.
Mm-hmm.
And Locking Up Our Own is the book. James Foreman Jr. has a great book where he literally writes out how there was a push in the early civil rights movement to get Black cops, because there was the thought that if there were Black cops, they would know who the quote unquote good Black people were. That hasn't necessarily happened. So as we look back on 92 and the $800 million to $1 billion worth of damage, you can juxtapose it to 2020.
That was what the damage was, the riots?
Right? Mm-hmm. 64 people died, 2,300 injuries. What changed? What are we still talking about when it comes to reforming police? We're still kind of having the same discussion that misses very, very important points, is that there's municipal policies, first of all, that just involve law enforcement. So before Rodney King and far after 65 was 1979, a woman named Eula Love was murdered by law enforcement. She had 12 bullets in her, a 60-some-year-old woman who couldn't pay a water bill. And it was procedure that, when they couldn't pay a bill, they have to cut the water off. If the person is difficult when they're trying to cut the water off, you call the sheriff's department. She came out with a butcher knife, old lady, cops put 12 bullets in her. Daryl Gates defends this. About 4 years later in New York, a woman named Eleanor Bumpers is murdered by the sheriff's department because she is being served an eviction notice and comes to the door with a butter knife, I believe, or a paring knife. So what we're seeing here is municipal policies that are punishing poverty, and that becomes law enforcement's role. So how can you make this more civil? We're looking at it from the wrong lens. In 65, the call was for jobs, but you don't get that. You get community centers, and you get, especially after the Kerner Commission report, you get more images of yourself on TV, right?
You're talking about the Watts riots. They were in 65. And what prompted the Watts riots?
You know, similar things that happened with 92, an overzealous police force that is extremely fascistic, extremely racist at the time, and people had had enough. And some cops pulled over a couple of brothers, and a fight broke out. And I think they might have shoved a mother or a sister of one of the guys that might have been pregnant or she looked pregnant, and then people kind of, you know, went crazy, and the rest is history.
And the news media had helicopters, and they were able to send video of the riots live, and it became compelling across America. You could watch the riots in the safety of your own home and be terrified of Black people and the inner city.
And also there was a message, you know, because again, everything is very extremely racialized. So there was a message coming out of the riots when they were having these great big meetings that were like, you know, hey, we're coming to the white neighborhoods next. We're not going to just keep messing up our own neighborhoods. That, of course, never happened.
So there is a my kids were raised in Los Angeles, and there was a demilitarized zone. There was south of Wilshire. There was north of Wilshire and south of, and you just did not see African Americans north of Wilshire, where my kids grew up. And so the Sister Souljah statement, who went to she went to Dwight Morrow High School. I'm a graduate of Dwight Morrow High School in New Jersey. And Sister Souljah famously said, why don't Black people take a break from killing each other and start killing white people? And Bill Clinton used that right around when he was running for president after
92.
He used that to betray his African-American constituents. The first of many, not the first, and attack Sister Souljah. But it did make sense. And I wonder, you said how many people died in the riot?
64.
I remember Reginald Denny getting hit over the head. He was white.
Oh yeah. He got beat. He almost got killed.
Right.
And it was Black people that actually saved him.
Yep. So do we know the numbers? Was it mostly Black on Black business, or we know?
As far as the damage?
Yeah, because it came into, I remember it came, I think it was the Korean shop owners.
Yes.
Brought out guns to protect their stores. There's a lot of tension between the Koreans and the African Americans. Of course. Who suffered most of the casualties?
Black people died. I think there's 28 deaths of Black people, 15 of white, 2 Asian, and the rest were Latin.
And were they killed by police, or do we know how the police?
We don't know. The police, I think only 2 police officers died in the entire thing. I mean, you got to remember when the 92 really blows up, police bailed out. They got out in a hurry.
And Bush sent in the National Guard
a few days later. Yeah. And originally, when the Rodney King beating is shown originally, and a lot of people probably won't think this is true, but look it up if you don't believe me, it didn't even make the front page of the LA Times. It was on page like 8.
Even with the
videotape. It kind of caught a life of its own with, again, the 24-hour news cycle. And again, when you think about OJ and Rodney King, they're both extremely racialized cases that we look at when we think of the term justice. And I asked the question is like, what do we what do we mean when we say justice? And then what does justice look like? If Cornel West says justice is what love looks like in public, you know, then why is OJ justice? Because there was a sigh of finally when that acquitted verdict comes down, and Rodney King is, you know, cause for blowing up a city, and then his name kind of gets removed from the incident altogether because he wasn't the spokesperson that you could project your movement on. And there's a lot to be said about trying to build a movement off of a beaten person. You know, he wasn't a public speaker, he wasn't an activist, he was just a dude.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, he didn't want the violence happening in his name.
Right. So one of the remarkable things about capitalism and neoliberalism is its resiliency. It learns,
Mhm.
it shifts, learns from its past mistakes. Invade Iraq, the mistake in Vietnam we made was allowing journalists like Walter Cronkite to go off and film the atrocities. Don't allow that. We learn from our mistakes to make things worse for the rest of the world. Right now, Black Lives Matter, the George Floyd murder, what did the ruling class learn from Rodney King that they applied to the George Floyd murder?
You know, it goes back to 68. It's kind of like, how do you satiate these angry masses, especially as you have a left that's no longer rooted in the working class? And Stephen, to bring up your point about Iraq, there really is no left. There's a bit of an anti-war movement, but no one really thinks about the anti-war movement during the Iraq War, even though some of the biggest protests that happened in history happened at that time. We never really think about that. It's a very apolitical time for the country as a whole. Post the fall of the Soviet Union, when the big bad is gone, there's really nothing for Americans to be mad at. And you have a lot of deregulation that is allowing a certain segment of the population to now get hoisted up into the middle class. So I think that has a lot more to do with the fact that there was no journalism, because if you think about, as the Iraq War and Afghanistan lasted for so long, you have some of the best journalism that comes out during that time. Jeremy Scahill writes Dirty War, which is an amazing expose on what was really going on over there, you know. But it kind of falls on deaf ears because more people would rather watch people getting kicked in the nuts on Jackass.
Right.
People would rather watch Fear Factor. I can get internet porn from my phone whenever I want it.
Can you get tractor porn?
Hey, if I can beat one to it, I can watch it. So, so you know, let's be serious here. So what do you get after 68? You get a lot of, and Pascal talks about this all the time. You get the Kerner Commission report. It's like, we have to start, what's representation. A lot more Black shows, a lot more Black people on TV. You get the same things in the 90s, just looks a little different. We start to get all these hood movies. Why does the frustration get quelled? I mean, New York, up until Dinkins becomes mayor, is a powder keg of racial tension. Los Angeles has a Black mayor and had one for a long time, for over a decade. Tom Bradley was mayor. It's during Tom Bradley's regime in 84, before 84, before the Olympics, that the LA Police Department gets militarized as they're trying to clean out that area for the Olympics. So what calms people down? Sometimes it's a little bit of capitalism. It's a little bit of come up. And that's just something that people don't like to think about.
You let just enough in so it dilutes the anger, and you turn it back on the Black community and say, you see, Jason made it. How come you can't?
Watch a movie like Boys in the Hood. Watch a movie like Boys in the Hood. And Boys in the Hood is steeped in Moynihan-esque logic. It is the failure of the Black household. It is these matriarchal households that are the problem. If they just go to college and pull up their pants, they will succeed.
You're talking about
These-
Patrick Moynihan and benign
Yes.
neglect.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. We have to wrap it up. We have a Senate candidate coming up. I love you. I love having you on the show. This has to continue next week. I wish we could continue it Thursday, but you have This is Revolution.
I will get a hold of Hannah and see what time Thursday, see if I can make it work.
Okay. I'd like to continue this. Thank you. Jason Miles is the host of This is Revolution with Pascal Robert. It's a brilliant show, and Jason does some amazing videos. I watched your report on the Rodney King arrest and the fetishization of white police officers patrolling the inner city and how they were just doing their job.
Just doing their job.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Jason. How do people follow you? How do people contact you?
You can find me at TIR Show Oakland on Twitter. This is revolutionpodcast.com. We're on all the sites. Leave a message. We'll get back to you. Thank you, David.
Thank you. I wish we had more time.